Marcus Caldwell did not look like a federal agent. That was the point. He wore a faded gray jacket that was slightly too big for his shoulders. His shoes were clean but old. His car was a 2004 Chevrolet with a small dent on the passenger door and an air freshener hanging from the mirror. He had a phone with a cracked screen and a wallet with $43 in it. Everything about him said ordinary. Everything about him said forgettable. That was exactly how the Federal Bureau of Investigation needed him to look. Marcus was 34 years old and had spent the last 6 years working undercover assignments across the American South. He was quiet by nature, sharp by training, and patient in a way that most people never learn to be. He could sit in a room and listen for hours without fidgeting. He could hold a conversation with someone dangerous and never let his eyes give anything away. His supervisors at the Atlanta field office said he was the best they had seen in a decade. Marcus never said much about that. He just did the work. The work, in the spring of that year, meant driving to a city called Hargrove Falls. Hargrove Falls was the kind of place that looked fine from a distance. It had a new courthouse, a rebuilt downtown, and a mayor who gave speeches about progress. But the Bureau had been watching it for a long time, and what they saw behind the nice buildings was not progress at all. What they saw was a system that had been quietly broken for years, broken in ways that hurt real people and sent them to prison for things they should never have gone to prison for. At the center of that broken system was a woman named Judge Carolyn Whitfield. She had been on the bench for 11 years. She was known for being tough, for speaking firmly, and for never letting a case drag on longer than she thought it needed to. The local newspapers liked her. The city's established families respected her. She gave speeches at civic events and quoted the law with the confidence of someone who believed deeply in it. But what Carolyn Whitfield believed deeply in was money. Over the years, she had built a quiet arrangement with a group of people around her courthouse. Lawyers who paid into her system, who passed money through a small network of middlemen, found that their clients received lighter sentences, reduced charges, or sometimes walked out of her courtroom entirely free. Lawyers who refused to participate found the opposite. Their clients received the maximum sentence the law allowed. Their motions were denied. Their arguments were dismissed before they finished speaking. The pattern the Bureau had identified was painful to look at. Black defendants whose lawyers were not part of the arrangement received sentences that were, on average, 3 times longer than white defendants facing the same charges whose lawyers were connected to Whitfield's network. It was not random. It was not coincidence. It was a decision, made deliberately, repeated again and again over years. Marcus had been given 8 months to build the case that would end it. He arrived in Hargrove Falls as a man named Devin Miles. Devin Miles was, on paper, a 34-year-old man from the Atlanta area with a prior criminal record who had recently been released and was looking for work and familiar faces in a new city. The FBI had prepared everything carefully: documents, a rented room, a background history that would survive any check a street-level person might run. Marcus had memorized the details of Devin Miles's life until they felt as natural as his own. He found his way into the edges of Whitfield's world through a bail bondsman named Terrence Ogle. Ogle was loud, friendly, and not particularly careful about what he said around people he had decided were trustworthy. Marcus spent 3 weeks being exactly the kind of person Ogle would decide was trustworthy. He showed up when he said he would. He was helpful without being eager. He listened more than he talked. Within a month, Ogle was inviting him to the card games where the real conversations happened. Those conversations were recorded. Every one of them. Marcus listened to prosecutors talk about which judges to use for which cases. He heard attorneys discuss which cases were worth paying for and which were not. He sat at a kitchen table and heard Terrence Ogle explain, in very plain terms, how the system worked, how money moved, who received it, and what you received in return. He nodded and said little and sent detailed reports to his handler, Supervisory Special Agent Diane Kowalski, every night. Kowalski read each report carefully. The case was growing into something significant. Not just a bribery charge, a federal civil rights case, a conspiracy charge, a pattern of deliberate harm stretching back years. The Bureau was patient. They wanted it to be complete. They wanted every thread tied before they moved. Marcus kept working. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early March, everything shifted. He was driving back from a meeting with Ogle when a patrol car pulled in behind him and turned on its lights. The officer was a deputy named Kurt Riggins, a man Marcus had seen twice before in the background of conversations he had been recording. Riggins was part of the network, not at the center of it, but connected enough to know whose interests he was serving. The reason given for the stop was a broken tail light. The tail light was not broken. Marcus knew it. Riggins likely knew it. But the stop happened anyway. Riggins ran the name Devon Miles through his system and found what he was supposed to find: a prior record and a flag for further investigation. He searched the car. In the glove compartment, he found a firearm. Marcus carried it legally as a federal law enforcement officer, but Devon Miles had no such license. Devon Miles, with a prior record, was not legally permitted to possess a firearm at all. Riggins looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. In the silence of that moment, Marcus understood what he was facing. If he identified himself as an FBI agent, the investigation was over. 8 months of work, hundreds of recorded conversations, a federal case that could free people who had been wrongly imprisoned, all of it would collapse. Whitfield would hear about it before sunrise. The network would scatter. And every person she had wronged would remain in a cell. Marcus said nothing. He was arrested, handcuffed, and taken to Hargrove County Jail under the name Devon Miles. He was permitted one phone call. He used it to reach Kowalski. The conversation was short and careful. Kowalski told him that the Bureau was aware of the situation. She told him that a decision would be made at the senior level about how to proceed. She told him to stay calm and to say nothing. He told her he understood. That was the end of the call. The decision that came back from the field office was not the one most people would expect. They would let it continue. The reasoning was precise. Whitfield would process Devon Miles the same way she had processed hundreds of others, as a black defendant with a prior record and an attorney who was not part of her arrangement. If she did what she had always done, that moment would become the clearest evidence in the entire case. Not a recorded conversation about what she might do. An actual documented act, committed against a man whose real identity was known and whose record could be fully accounted for. Marcus was appointed a public defender named Rachel Dominguez. She was young, overworked, and completely genuine. She had nothing to do with Whitfield's network and no knowledge of what was actually happening. She met with Devon Miles and told him honestly that the charge was serious. She said she would do everything she could. She filed motions and made arguments and was stonewalled at every turn by a prosecuting attorney who was, Marcus knew from his recordings, deeply embedded in the scheme. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Marcus's career. He sat in a courthouse he had been investigating for 8 months. He watched attorneys he had recorded at kitchen tables stand before a judge he had documented committing federal crimes. He listened to arguments about the life of a man who did not exist, Devon Miles, while his own actual life waited quietly somewhere else. He kept his expression neutral. He stayed patient. He did what he had always done. The day of sentencing arrived. Judge Carolyn Whitfield took her seat with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once believed the consequences that applied to others could ever apply to her. She arranged her papers. She glanced briefly at the defendant. She heard the summary of the case from the prosecutor and the final statement from Rachel Dominguez, who argued sincerely and well for leniency. Whitfield was unmoved. She sentenced Devon Miles to 30 months in state prison. She added probation to follow. She declined to give credit for time already served. She said a few sentences about the responsibility of the court to protect the community and the importance of deterrence. Her voice was steady and practiced. She had said these kinds of sentences many times before. She did not look at Marcus twice. She did not see the men who had sat across from Terrence Ogle for months. She did not see the agent who had recorded the conversations that named her. She saw Devon Miles, a black man with a record and an attorney who was not in her network, and she did to him exactly what she had done to men like him for years. She did not know what she had just done. 2 days later, before any transfer to state custody could take place, a federal agent walked into the Hargrove County Jail and presented the warden with a court order and a set of credentials. Marcus Caldwell walked out. The following morning, at 6:14, Judge Carolyn Whitfield was arrested at her home. She came to the door in a robe. She stood in her doorway and looked at the federal agents and the papers they were holding, and for the first time in perhaps many years, she had absolutely nothing to say. The warrant listed 47 counts: bribery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The same morning, 5 other members of her network were arrested at separate locations across the city. Terrence Ogle was taken from his car in a parking lot. Deputy Kurt Riggins was arrested at his home. 2 senior prosecutors were taken from their offices while colleagues watched. By noon, it was on the local news. By evening, it had gone national. The federal trial began 18 months later. Marcus sat in the witness chair for 4 days. He walked the jury through every piece of evidence, every recorded conversation, every documented payment, every ruling that had been bought and sold in a courtroom that was supposed to stand for something better. He described the night of his arrest. He described the sentencing. He described sitting before the defendant he had been investigating for 8 months and listening to her sentence him to 30 months in prison. He was completely calm throughout. His voice did not rise. He did not editorialize. He simply told the truth, clearly and in order, and let the weight of it settle on the room by itself. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Carolyn Whitfield was convicted on 31 counts. The federal judge who sentenced her did not use practiced, empty language. She spoke plainly about what had happened in that courthouse, about the people who had been harmed, about the faith that had been destroyed, and about what the law was supposed to mean. She sentenced Whitfield to 14 years in federal prison. Whitfield said nothing as the sentence was read. She stared at a point somewhere above the judge's head, and then the marshals came and took her away. In the months that followed, a federal review team went through the records of Hargrove County's criminal court. They examined 38 cases. They found 11 convictions that should not have stood. 6 people were released from state custody, men who had been sitting in prison cells because their attorney had refused to pay a judge who had decided that justice was something you could charge for. 6 people walked out of prison because of what Marcus had done. He went back to work at the Atlanta field office. He was promoted. His supervisors wrote about him in terms that rarely appear in official documents. He did not give interviews. He did not appear on television. He did not write anything down for public consumption. Rachel Dominguez, who had represented Devin Miles with complete sincerity and lost, eventually learned the truth from a news article that included a brief description of the undercover operation. She later said that she had always sensed something unusual about her client, that he seemed to understand everything happening in that courtroom at a level she could not quite explain. She said she had thought about him many times over the years, in a quiet, unresolved way. When she finally understood why, she said it all made sense at once. The courtroom where Carolyn Whitfield had held her court was reassigned to a new judge. The wood paneling was the same. The fluorescent lights hummed the same way. The American flag stood in the same corner beside the door. But the people who walked into that room walked in differently now, because they had learned, in the most public way possible, what it meant when the wrong person sat in the chair behind that bench. Marcus Caldwell had driven into Hargrove Falls alone with $43 in a cracked screen phone-era wallet and a borrowed identity. He had done his job with the kind of patience and discipline that most people never see and never know to look for. He had sat in a jail cell to protect a case that would free people he had never met. He had let a corrupt judge sentence him to 30 months in prison rather than let her walk free. He had never once flinched. There is a version of justice that is loud, that announces itself with speeches and ceremonies and headlines. And then there is the version that Marcus Caldwell practiced, which is quiet and long and often invisible, carried out in borrowed cars and rented rooms by people whose real names you will never see on a plaque. That version is slower. But it gets there. And when it arrived in Hargrove Falls, it arrived exactly on time.